I will invite Mervyn King to follow, and Mervyn, 5 minutes for you too.
Thank you very much. The key words in this session are sustainable economy, society, and a balance between humans and the environment. The question in this session is really about society. What is society? It's a group of people associated with each other through persistent relations. Who are they? Well, in relation to a corporation or any organization, providers of capital, pension funds, superannuation funds, the great asset owners, in fact, it's other people's money. It's your money, the individual. The providers of loans to organizations, banks, who are the depositors? You are the depositors. Who's the lender of last resort? It's the government. Who provides money to the government? You do, the individual. Who are the providers of labor? You are, the individual. Who are the customers that buy the product or receive the services of an institution or an organization? The individual, who's a member of society. Besides government and the business itself, there's civil society, the NGOs. All these individuals today constitute society, and they have a greater expectation today of the good citizenship of entities around the world. An analysis of the great corporations around the world show that 80% of value in monetary terms is not evidenced by additives in a balance sheet, according to financial reporting standards. So it's a question of reputation, integrity of the board, good governance, and the most critical issue is how has the company embedded the sustainability issues into its long-term strategy and told you in clear, concise, and understandable language so that you can make an informed assessment that this business is going to sustain value creation. How is this business model? How does it make its money? How does it enhance its impacts on society and the environment? How does it eradicate or ameliorate the negative impacts on society or the environment? All these things are inseparable, interconnected, and interdependent, both functionally inside an organization and operationally. They are integrated. That is the concept of integrated thinking. Without that, we will not have a sustainable economy. Society is the licensor that permits all of us to carry on business. And the individuals must not forget that. Thank you.
You actually gave me a minute. And now, Walter, over to you. Walter Fust. Put another 5 minutes there.
Thank you. Well, I would not repeat what we heard, and I would not be able to do it with the same eloquency. But what was striking me during these conference workshops was in one sentence that probably the social media are the single most or strongest enabler in changing inequalities. That was very strongly emphasized this morning in a workshop. You might ask why and how, but we also had clearly views expressed that there are limits, there are new questions towards responsibility to empower people, empower citizens through those new medias. The second point we often heard was, is inclusion a way leading to better success? And I very much like what we just heard a couple of minutes ago, that the process is as important as maybe the question of equality. For example, financial inclusion, making poor people bankable, is in probably 3 million people on this earth still an issue, not solved. But inclusion also means that you have a personal identity. And then about 20% of world population has no identity cards, just a simple fact. And as long as you don't have something showing who you are not very often an accepted personality with regard to your civic rights and duties. We also heard that inclusion might hurt governments, because many governments are not so enthusiastic to see all people empowered, because they think govern non-empowered people is easier than empowered people. I would clearly state the thesis that it is far easier to govern well-educated, well-informed citizens, because common sense is a very important tool to lead to better equalities. And then maybe a personal remark we did not talk about, but one of the biggest issues the world and world governance is faced with today and the next years is youth unemployment. How can we talk about equality or inequality and not addressing youth unemployment? And yet we are about to decide in the UN the new so-called SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, following the Millennium Development Goals, and youth unemployment is not even a sustainable development goal. I very much hope that this can be corrected by the end of this year. And the last point is, when you talk to different economically well-trained people about what makes an economy work well, less well, then one thing is striking, that in many economies of this world, we have not yet done enough to mobilize the so-called dormant assets. In many economies, there are values not validated economically for the economic process. And in my opinion, those dormant assets, they can play a key role in 10 or 20 years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm now going to hand it over to Shibu, 5 minutes again.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Because after hearing the three panelists, there isn't much to add, and unfortunately, I have not been able to spend much time here. There is only one point I wanted to make, and it came to me while listening to everything. See, we talked about stakeholders. Yesterday also I talked about multi-stakeholder approach. to resolving most of these issues. Because the issues are very large and we have to involve the government, the social sector, the academia. I think there is one stakeholder who we may not talk about much, and which is the individual. Because I think at the end of the day, change is driven by the. If you look at right now what happened in India with the Aam Aadmi Party, it was driven by a set of individuals. So when we talk about action or inaction, finally, individual as a stakeholder has to be part of it. I think we need to emphasize the fact that at the end of the day, each of us have a responsibility to move towards the goals, whether it is equality, whether it is sharing wealth, whether it is creating a sustainable lifestyle, whether it is being a role model, whether it is leading from the front. I think the individual has a lot of responsibility in this world. And being a connected world today, I think the responsibilities are much more. Because the olden days, what you do, even if you know, everything which I talked about is very local. You lead by example in the local space, you are a role model in the local space, you can create impact in the local space. But in today's world, as an individual, you have all the instruments in your hand to make change. Be a role model, create a lifestyle which is different, bring sustainability into the world, share your wealth, give back to the society, all of this. And you are equally responsible for your inaction. A lot of people think that there are only two states, either you act or don't act. And there is no responsibility for the inaction, but you are equally responsible for the inaction. You are equally responsible if you are a bystander. I think when we talk about all of these issues, we really need to emphasize the fact that individuals have to take the responsibility to address them in their own ways. And that's, I think that's how the world will change.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Shibu, because you gave me 4 more minutes, and I'm now going to use what we have to turn it over to this group. And there were 5 things that struck me out of all your presentations, and I'm just pulling them together, not necessarily in any particular order, but if you really look at it in terms of citizenship and integrated thinking as the heart of what Mervyn King was saying, social media and the youth, and in particular employment as what Walter Fust was saying, and then Theodorina with her principles. And what was very nice is how we could have forgotten inclusiveness as a principle in an equality and an inequality forum, and that itself is a good point to conclude with what Shibu really mentioned about individuals and what is it that we are doing. But I see something interesting that's happening between what you're saying to what the others have said, which means that there is an individual inclusiveness and everything that is needed from an individual action, but there's also a collective action. And I think somewhere, what I would like to hear from the participants here is these perspectives around what you have heard so far. So my request to you, and 2 requests. One is don't deviate from the topic, because we are needing the closure to the conference, and therefore, if you have something to say, let it focus on what has been responded. But the second and more important one is really that don't spend a lot of time about yourself. Spend some time on looking at how can we enable others, so which means keep your comments short, crisp, and clear. Okay? Over to you. Any hands there? Post-lunch fatigue. Yes, good, I like that. So we'll be...
So I was in one of the panels also highlighting the fact that when we want the individual change, and that has to start young. So the role of engaging the children in all of these. So my recommendation, and to include in the actions following the principle, is how do we inculcate ethical values in children? How do we inspire children to think ethically? And how do we empower them to think critically, but also ethically?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great. Any other hands? Yes.
I'm Ashok, from corporate world. Normally we have this concept, anything on concept, and there is something called application knowledge. Right? So same thing in this subject also. Quickly, how do we apply all this in our real time so that it becomes part of ourselves, or we call it as in our language skill, right? Knowledge and skill. So just to give an example, in one of the courses which I did, MSW, twice in a day, I used to go and spend time in the society around me from morning to evening. That has really helped me to understand the society around. So coming back here, to draw that parallel, how do we apply all this in terms of making that is part of us?
Thank you. Good reflective question. I see 3 hands there. Okay, we'll take 3 questions at a time. Is that
risks we are taking, not having our young generation with enough insight, with enough confidence, with enough space to act toward their future. Unemployed young people, 70% in Greece, and all over the world. Not talking about Africa, not talking about other places where things are. So I have been having many conversations, and I think we cannot rely on systems. We cannot rely on bureaucrats, and we cannot rely definitely on politicians in this very critical time in human history. I think it's all lesson. We have to rely on our own skills and knowledge and common sense. In the past, in very difficult times, humanity and different nations have found way out of crisis through giving space and empowering people who are creative, people who have means to make a change. What is necessary in this moment is not just to empower them, but also to give them some moral and some value incentive, so we to be sure the change happens in the right direction. But building young entrepreneurs, not building weak young people who are afraid because they don't have governmental job, but having young people who don't care about the government job because they see that there are a lot of needs their ideas can meet. So entrepreneurship development among the young generation, empowering them that they see a lot of opportunities and they should act on these opportunities, then giving them tools, opening space for them, and also access to resources, because young people, as many minorities and disadvantaged people, are not seen as capable of accessing resources.
okay? Anyone else on the other question?
Actually, I was going to answer the youth question. Actually, this is a much bigger problem for a country like India because our demographic is shifting. This is the only country, I think, in the world where 65% of the people are below the age of 35. And we talk about this enormous demographic dividend which we are supposed to get. It is all going to depend upon how protective we can make this people. And we are right now not doing a great job because education system is not supporting it, the employment system is not supporting it. As as we just heard, it is all about, I think the only solution is to make them confident. Make them confident, make them ready to take a risk. And encourage them to, encourage them even when they fail. Actually, I was going to say encourage them to fail. Actually, that is also required because sometimes they have to fail. That's where the confidence comes from. So the solutions have to be within the local societies where we have to find ways to allow them to take risks, encourage them even when they fail, and support them through that journey. So it's very, very important for a country like ours. And actually, when the question was asked, I was wondering, we also have a challenge in being role models to the next generation. Because today, the children are so connected and so influenced by the environment. At the same time, we as parents and adults have a responsibility to make sure that we are the right role models to our children. Even I see it with my own children that various concerns, I isolate the children. I try to bring them up in a cocoon which is away from all the inequalities, away from the dangers of the so-called dangers of the world. And that itself is a problem because they don't understand, they don't experience, they don't have the empathy sometimes. So as adults, I think we have a major responsibility to make sure that we are the role models, we expose them, to make them understand that world is not flat. Actually, it is very curved in many places when it comes to equality. So these two things are very, very important.
Well, just dealing with both those questions, first of all, I think we can all accept that no decision made in any cabinet room will be an answer to any of these issues. Answers will come from decisions in boardrooms and other decision-making places. It will not come from cabinet rooms. We saw that again at Rio with climate change. Governments were completely indecisive. Also, don't forget, governments today are hamstrung by jurisdictional boundaries. And yet we live in a globalized, flat, borderless electronic world. While you're asleep at night with the click of a mouse, money comes into India and leaves India. And yet the government might have power in India, but outside India, no power. So, dealing with the second question, no entity, be it in the private sector or the public sector, operates in a vacuum. It operates in a triple context of the financial, the economy, society, and the environment. Any director or a trustee that overlooks that then fails in his duty of care to that entity, because your activity, the way you carry on business, impacts on society and the environment. Your product impacts on society and the environment. You have to think long term as to how these impacts, how you're going to enhance the positive impacts and eradicate the negative ones. So you need to be informed. How do you become informed? You need an inclusive approach. You need an ongoing strategic communication with your stakeholders to be informed as to what their needs, interests, and expectations are of your business entity. They can understand their obligations, but you need to know what their perceptions of the company are. Your management becomes informed. Your management on an informed basis can develop strategy. Your board should at every board meeting be discussing these issues. 80% of your board meeting time should be taken up with these strategic issues, not with management accounts, as we've done in the past. You have to think long term, because we have in fact reached a stage in the world where if we don't think long term, we may not see the 22nd century.
That's a difficult question, and I think all of us need to reflect on that. I'm going to take observations, okay, from there. There are 3 hands that I know there, here one and there one. Yes, I do. And we will close this in about 8 minutes. Yeah.
Start from the connect between enlightened citizenship and integrative thinking, which Dr. King has mentioned. And also trying to reflect on Shibulal's question that what are the consequences of our inaction? As an academic of the IIM fraternity, my question is, first, are we willing, daring to challenge the conventional structured management thinking and education to prepare for those people in the boardrooms who will spend 80% of the time on these strategic matters later on? And if so, what alternative thinking, what alternative learning are we trying to introduce in our curriculum in the days to come?
Okay. So let's take that, and because I will then give it to the panel last for one round of comments, and you can pick whichever one that you want to address. Yes.
My humble suggestion would be, if we are looking to get the youth and the young involved, maybe we will have to rework on messaging and how do we transmit the whole message to the younger generation. So my question would be, how are we going to, if we go out and say, let's be ethical, I don't think many young people will join. So how are we going to message this whole thing that we are discussing over here?
Thank you, thank you. Great. One more there. Yes.
Presently, my observations on inclusivity, something that did not come out very implicitly. Inclusivity as affirmation of space. Yesterday, we had a panel on Titan, Infosys, and Intel, where we heard them as ethical business houses. But how ethical would we be if we take over right from aviation industry onto table salt and not giving space for anybody else? So inclusivity is about giving space, affirmation of space, particularly for SMEs. The other aspect of inclusivity is including business houses, industry, and other such agencies getting included into the agenda of life and living of individuals and groups in society, rather than the other way around, trying to tell we are including the interests of individuals also in our businesses.
Okay, good, interesting question.
Really heavily dominate decision-making processes. And Dr. Ashwin Mahesh talked about the value of involving individuals who haven't personally struggled in their life with the issue of inequality or face discrimination in society. But what are some of the tangible incentives for these people to get involved in bringing about change? And how do you communicate these incentives to these people so that they know that they should be the ones doing this?
Okay, thank you. Yes?
Yeah, thank you. My question is very brief. I just want to underpin the principle of motivation. And we think, I ask this question, what motivates us individually, personally, globally, communally, to be agents of change? So as an ethical toolkit, I think we need to rediscover the principle of motivation. Every one of us has a motivation. We have a motivation of coming here, and I believe 800% good. But politicians and other people, they have also motivations to bring change in order to be elected, in order to be famous, publish in order to be famous. Each and every one of us.
How do you treat the same as same, and how do you include the different? Apart from that, I would suggest a kind of template for equality audit as part of business ethics audit. And this business ethics audit outcome could be indexed and could be connected to taxation. It could also be connected to CSR initiatives, the so-called CSR initiatives. So that could be a very concrete and practical way of connecting. Thank you.
Panelist, I just had a small question to throw before this Global Ethics Forum. What is that? We are generally speaking about integrity. So ultimately, the individuals, business, and the academia, we are going to be tripartite integrated. So when I have to emphasize for business decision making, how are we going to go about the trade-off between ethics and values? What is the decision? How are we going to make a decision? And it is across the borders, when we are going to bring in a uniformity in structure, decision making, how is that trade-off is going to happen? Thank you.
Thank you. And here's the last one, and then we will I want one big statement from each of you that will somewhat answer some of the questions.
I have a question specifically for, but I don't want an answer.
Yeah, you can ask him after the
from Mr. Shibulal. I think in a world where life is extremely fast-paced, ethical behavior and ethical conduct calls for reflection. So how could we blend rationality with more and more of reflective skills? I mean, reflecting at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, all the time. Some kind of dynamic meditation maybe.
And, yes. Close at 2:59.
Thank you. 2 points regarding messaging or use. That reminds my father. He passed away when I was 16 through an accident. And I often argued with him, he was a small entrepreneur, yeah, what is the sense of life and what should I go to do? And he told me only one thing. He said, young man, your life is your enterprise. Be aware lifelong. If there is no lifelong earning without lifelong learning, you will get old when you lose curiosity. And I think he was very wise to tell me that, even though he was a simple man. The second issue related to governance and governments. I think we have today a problem in governance because practically everybody is acting in a way rules-based. And that is very often not leading to problem solutions. And with existing rules, you cannot solve many issues or all the issues. So what is needed to change those rules? Maybe also to change the laws based on which you set up the rules. And that is not happening or not adequately happening. We should also have a little bit more entrepreneurship in public administration. And maybe a very last single point, also this message. When you look at the Greek sculptures, you never see a sculpture with the 2 foot firmly on the ground. They normally have one firmly on the ground. The other one is inclined to make the next steps.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think what is critical, if I just listen to some of the observations, is an appreciation that we cannot and will not change anything if we continue with the mindset we've had in the 19th and 20th centuries. We've got to change our mindset. And that mindset was a short-term one. It was based on short-termism. In the corporate world, it was based on share price and a monetary bottom line, irrespective of the impact on environment or humanity. Today, society just does not accept that. And I've tried to explain to you that society involves all of us. There's a huge amount of activism in society. You look at the Arab Spring, the Wall Street occupiers. Society does not just accept what happens. When I opened this institution 10 years ago with Professor Bala, I suggested the word citizenship. One of the first books I ever wrote was on the corporate citizen. Why is it we expect our neighbor to act as a decent citizen? And yet we permit companies and other entities and organizations to act as poor citizens. It's totally unacceptable. And these organizations have a huge impact, a much bigger impact on society than the individual. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, it impacted adversely on 2 billion people. Today, Microsoft impacts positively on 2 billion people. When an individual dies, sad for 100 people, for 1,000 people. But the corporation, the organization is critical in society. And if the leaders of those do not change their mindset and adopt what I've called an inclusive approach, to accept that the entities operate in this triple context. We've all heard of the triple bottom line, but we never reported in that, nor will we in our generation, because there's no metric for it. So we will always report in monetary terms. But the critical issue is, how did we make our money? That's the critical issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Shibulal?
I'll actually make it very brief. I think there was a question on how do you balance ethics and profits. And I think these things have, in my mind, very simple answer. Corporations exist to create wealth for its stakeholders in legal and ethical ways. So it's a very simple answer. If they exist to create wealth for the stakeholders, including society, in a legal and ethical manner. You can't violate the basic principle. If you violate the basic principle, then you are doing fraud. So the principles are very simple. And on the motivation factor also, I was about to say, I was thinking about it. See, I sit here because hundreds and thousands of people have contributed to my life. I was born, there were 100 teachers who must have taught me multiple things, there are friends who have helped me. Every one of the people who are sitting in this room or thousands of other people have helped me reach here and sit here. There has to be a sense of responsibility, and that has to be the motivation finally. That sense of responsibility that we are here today, our life is comfortable, we are taking benefits because thousands of people have put their heart and soul behind it. That has to drive a sense of responsibility in the individual, and that has to be the motivation.
Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant. So I'm not going to say anything. I would like you, if possible, to act. I have one simple question. It has been since I started organizing this conference, how we are going to end it. And I wanted to end it with action, energy, momentum. So my question is testing if it has a momentum. And you feel free, I mean, there might be no momentum. So my question is, are you voting for continuing the process on finalizing this document which we started developing, consulted with you during these 2 days, and started collecting your input, a process which might take about 6 months? Are you ready, motivated to be part of this process? Please raise your hand if you are ready. And I don't see who is not ready. I think nobody is not ready. So thank you very much. We have work to do together.
On that note, I think I'm going to close the panel discussion. Thanks so much for that wonderful work. Thank you. Over to you, Christoph.